Ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes on the automobile of tomorrow. The Ford Nucleon. Picture it. No more gas stations, no more oil changes, no more fill-ups, ever again. This beauty runs on the same power that lights up entire cities, split right down to the atom and tucked neatly into a power capsule right here in the rear. 5,000 miles on a single charge, folks. 5,000. Drive coast to coast and back again before you'd ever need to think about refueling. And when you finally do, no greasy pumps, no waiting in line. Just pull into a Ford Nuclear station, and in minutes, a fresh power capsule sends you on your way again. Choose your performance. Choose your range. The Nucleon isn't just a car, it's the future of the American driveway, arriving sooner than you think.
That's how Ford pitched it in 1958. Here's what they actually built. To understand why anyone believed this was possible, you have to understand the moment. That same year, Pittsburgh became home to the world's first full-scale nuclear power plant, bringing electricity into ordinary homes. Nuclear energy wasn't science fiction anymore. It was arriving in daily life faster than anyone expected. Children played with atomic-themed toys. Comic books had atomic-powered heroes. If nuclear energy could power a city, why not a car? Ford didn't dream this up in a vacuum either. General Motors' annual Motorama shows were dazzling crowds every year with jet-age, chrome-covered concept cars that captured national headlines. Ford needed something to compete with that spectacle. And in a decade obsessed with atomic power, a nuclear-powered car was the boldest answer they could possibly give. There was a political backdrop too. President Eisenhower had recently launched a program called Atoms for Peace, aimed at reframing nuclear technology, not as a weapon of war, but as a tool for progress and everyday life. The Nucleon fit that message perfectly. Nuclear power reimagined as something you could park in your driveway. The concept came out of Ford's Advanced Styling Studio, a division built specifically to imagine vehicles 10 to 20 years ahead of their time. It was drawn by designer James Powers, working under studio head Alex Tremulis, with direction from Ford's styling chief George Walker. Walker believed concept cars existed to capture public imagination, whether or not the technology behind them actually existed yet. Visually, the Nucleon looked like nothing else on the road. Picture a streamlined pickup truck with all four wheels tucked beneath where the truck bed would be. Except instead of cargo, that space held a gleaming reactor housing. Ford called it the power capsule, and it was designed to be the visual centerpiece of the entire car, not something hidden away under a hood. The engineering wasn't pure fantasy either. Nuclear submarines already ran on exactly this principle. A small reactor would use uranium fission to heat water into high-pressure steam. That steam would spin not one, but two turbines, one driving the wheels directly, the other generating electricity to power the lights, the climate control, and every other system on board. On paper, it was a complete self-contained power plant, small enough to fit where an engine used to be. Ford even planned multiple versions of the reactor itself, interchangeable power packs. One tuned for performance, another built for efficiency, with taller gearing designed to stretch the car's range even further. The driver Ford imagined would simply choose their horsepower, and refueling wouldn't look anything like a gas station. Ford imagined an entirely new kind of infrastructure, specialized stations where technicians, not customers, would detach a depleted reactor core and install a fresh one. A car that never needed a fuel pump, only a station that traded in radioactive fuel. The design itself was built entirely around that reactor. Because it sat in the rear, engineers had to push the entire passenger cabin forward ahead of the front wheels, creating the car's strange, dramatic silhouette. The body was planned in aluminum, specifically to help offset the enormous weight the shielding would require. A bubble-style canopy echoed fighter jet cockpits. Twin tail fins at the rear visually framed the reactor housing, and the bumpers were designed to retract, reducing drag at highway speed. Interestingly, not every version looked identical. Some photos from the era show the car with those tail fins, while others show a cleaner, simpler rear end, closer to Ford's actual production styling a few years later. The full-size car was planned at just over 200 inches long, about the length of a modern pickup truck, with a roof height barely taller than a Ford GT40, one of the lowest production cars ever built. Its wheelbase was shorter than the original Mini Cooper, which is exactly what forced the cabin forward, creating huge overhangs at both ends of the vehicle. Here's where the concept collapsed. According to propulsion engineers, a reactor powerful enough to actually drive a car would need roughly 50 tons of shielding. Dense materials like lead or tungsten, specifically to block radiation. That's not a limitation of 1950s technology. That's basic physics. No future engineering breakthrough was ever going to shrink 50 tons down to the size of a car engine. The cooling problem was just as serious. The Nucleon's only cooling system was a handful of air intakes built into the roofline. But a nuclear reactor generates far more waste heat than any car engine ever does. Roof vents were never going to be enough to safely disperse it. The system, exactly as designed, simply couldn't cool itself. And then there's the most obvious problem of all. In an ordinary car, a crash means a dented bumper and an insurance claim. In the Nucleon, a serious collision meant a breached reactor, releasing radioactive material into an ordinary street in an ordinary town without warning. For all of this, the Ford Nucleon was never built at full scale. Ford actually constructed two models during development, one in plaster, used purely to study the car's shape and proportions, and a second in fiberglass, built as the final show model presented to the public. Only the fiberglass version survives today. There was no engine to start in either one. No wheels that ever turned under their own power. And Ford wasn't alone in this fantasy. Around the same years, French automaker Simca unveiled the Fulgur, a nuclear-powered concept that was also imagined as fully self-driving, controlled by radar and voice command. Ford itself returned to the idea in 1962. With a second nuclear concept called the Seattleite 21, designed again by Alex Tremulous. Even Studebaker-Packard got in on it, with a concept called the Astral, a single-wheeled, gyroscopically balanced vehicle that claimed to shield its passengers with a literal force field. At the time, the press treated it with genuine curiosity rather than outright skepticism. Contemporary coverage described the Nucleon as an advanced notion of the automotive future, a serious glimpse at where the industry might be heading, not the punchline it reads as today. That surviving fiberglass model still exists. It sits inside the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, as part of their Driving America exhibit, and has occasionally been loaned out to other institutions, including the Atomic Museum in Las Vegas. The core idea didn't disappear completely either. Decades later, companies like Tesla and the now closed startup Better Place built real battery swapping systems, conceptually not far from Ford's original vision of simply exchanging a depleted power source for a fresh one minus the radioactive part. And the underlying question hasn't fully closed either. The U.S. Department of Energy is currently studying small mobile nuclear reactors for other applications, meaning the core idea behind the Nucleon may not be dead so much as waiting for a different use case entirely. The idea even echoes in pop culture. The nuclear-powered cars featured throughout the Fallout video game series are a direct satirical descendant of designs like this one. An exaggerated joke built on a concept Ford once presented completely seriously. Ford wasn't lying about the vision. Nuclear power genuinely holds more energy than any gas tank ever could. What Ford was betting on was a technology shrinking fast enough to catch up to the imagination behind it. It never did. Sold as the future. Still decades later, waiting on physics to make good on the promise.